rewritten English version. You think that little notebook is going to save you? I've buried better attorneys than you with a single phone call. The gavel crashes down before she can respond. $500. Third sanction this month. The woman at the defendant's table doesn't flinch. She writes in her leather notebook the sanction details, while the judge's face reddens with something beyond professional displeasure. What Thatcher Vance doesn't know, the governor of Florida is watching, has been watching for many months, and the file on his desk, marked confidential judicial appointment, contains her name, not his. The fluorescent lights in courtroom 4C flicker once, as if the building itself recognizes the shift about to come. Amara Nwosu closes her notebook with a soft snap. 17 entries now. 17 sanctions, all from the same judge, all for procedural violations that existed only in his imagination and his clerk's sabotage. Do you have anything to say for yourself, counselor? Vance leans forward, silver hair catching the harsh light, eyes the color of gunmetal and twice as cold. Decades on the bench. 0 black attorneys who've successfully tried a case in his courtroom without sanctions. The math speaks louder than any testimony. The record will reflect my position, Your Honor. 7 words. No anger, no pleading, just documentation. The only weapon that works against men who believe themselves untouchable. Vance's jaw tightens. The court reporter's fingers pause over her stenograph machine. In the gallery, Graham Hollis, opposing counsel, Vance's golf buddy, the man who's won every motion in this courtroom for several years, allows himself a small smile. None of them see what Amara sees. The pattern, the paper trail, the 17 names in her notebook, all black attorneys, all sanctioned, all silenced. None of them know she stopped being a victim many months earlier and started being a witness. If you've ever felt the system was rigged against you, hit subscribe, because what happens next will restore your faith in karma. Years earlier. The coffee in Amara's cup had gone cold hours earlier, but she hadn't noticed. Case files spread across her desk like a paper battlefield. Bell versus Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office. Excessive force. A 23-year-old black man with 3 broken ribs and a ruptured spleen, arrested for matching a description that could have fit half the men in his neighborhood. The photographs made her stomach turn even now, on her 5th review. Bruises blooming purple and yellow across dark skin. Hospital intake forms listing injuries inconsistent with standard restraint procedures. And body cam footage, the parts the sheriff's office hadn't mysteriously lost, showing Darius Bell face down on asphalt, not resisting, while 3 officers took turns. Amara. Sylvia Hartwell stood in the doorway, reading glasses perched on her silver hair, a folder in her weathered hands. 61 years old, managing partner of Hartwell and Associates, decades fighting civil rights cases in a state that treated civil rights like a suggestion rather than a requirement. The Bell case needs reassignment. Judge Langford recused. Conflict of interest with the sheriff's union. Amara looked up. Who's taking it? Sylvia's pause lasted half a second too long. Vance. The name landed like a stone in still water. Amara had heard it before. Whispered in courthouse hallways, muttered over drinks at bar association events, spoken with the kind of careful neutrality that meant everyone knew something no one would say out loud. I've never appeared before him. I know. Sylvia set the folder on Amara's desk. Fresh start. The way she said it, not meeting Amara's eyes, fingers already retreating toward the door, told Amara everything the words didn't. What should I know? Sylvia stopped, turned. For a moment, something flickered across her face. Guilt, maybe? Or the exhaustion of someone who'd spent 3 decades learning which battles to fight and which to survive. Document everything. Keep copies of copies. And Amara? She hesitated. Don't give him a reason. A reason for what? But Sylvia was already gone. her footsteps fading down the hallway of the small firm they'd built together over years. Amara stared at the folder. Thatcher Vance, 4th District Court of Appeal. She'd find out soon enough what Sylvia wouldn't say. The Palm Beach County Courthouse rose from downtown like a monument to an idea of justice that had never quite existed. Art Deco facade, limestone columns, brass fixtures polished to a mirror shine. Amara had walked these halls 1,000 times. She knew which clerks would help and which would obstruct, which bailiffs remembered her name and which pretended not to see her. Today felt different. She approached the main security checkpoint, briefcase in hand, bar card ready. The line moved with typical bureaucratic lethargy. Attorneys, defendants, families, all shuffling toward the metal detectors like cattle toward a pen. A hand blocked her path. Counsel entrance is around the side. The bailiff was 55, maybe 60, belly straining against his uniform shirt, badge reading R. Pike, and a way of looking at her that made Amara's skin prickle with recognition. She'd seen that look her whole life, the look that said, "You don't belong here." "I am counsel." She held up her bar card. Amara Nwosu, Hartwell and Associates. Pike examined the card like he'd never seen one before. His eyes moved from the photo to her face, back to the photo, back to her face. 3 seconds. 5, 7. Nwosu. He pronounced it wrong, deliberately mangling the syllables. That African? Nigerian? My parents? Huh? He handed the card back with the kind of slowness that said he could make her wait as long as he wanted, and there wasn't a thing she could do about it. Courtroom 4C is on 4. Elevators to your left. Amara took the card without thanking him. There was nothing to thank him for, but she noted the name R. Pike, that moment, first floor security, and she noted the way he watched her walk away, his hand resting on his belt like he was hoping she'd give him a reason. The clerk's office smelled like old paper and bureaucratic indifference. Amara approached the counter with her motion to compel discovery, a standard filing, requesting the sheriff's office release all body cam footage, not just the sanitized clips they'd cherry-picked for their defense. The woman behind the counter had steel gray hair and a name tag reading Elaine Burkett. She looked at Amara the way a cat looks at a bird outside a window, with interest that wasn't quite friendly. Filing fee is $50. Motion to compel discovery doesn't have a filing fee. Amara kept her voice pleasant. Florida statute 28.241. Burkett's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Let me check. She turned to her computer, typed with 2 fingers, waited. Amara watched her hands, watched the way she positioned herself between the screen and the counter, blocking any view of what she was actually doing. Finally, you're right. No fee. Burkett took the motion, reached for her date stamp. But as she pressed it down, Amara saw something that made her breath catch. Burkett's thumb covered the date window. The stamp came down. The document was marked. But what date? What time? Can I get a receipt? Of course. Burkett printed a receipt, slid it across the counter. Amara took it and immediately raised her phone. What are you doing? Photographing my receipt for my records. Click. The timestamp on her phone read that moment. The receipt showed the same date, but Amara had learned something today. Elaine Burkett didn't want her to see what date went on that stamp. She filed that knowledge away with everything else. Documentation, copies of copies. Don't give him a reason. Courtroom 4. Looked like every other courtroom in the building. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, the scales of justice carved into the wall behind the judge's bench. But there was something about the air here. Something heavy and expectant, like the room itself was waiting for violence. Amara took her seat at the plaintiff's table. Across the aisle, Graham Hollis arranged his files with the casual confidence of a man who'd never lost in this room. Early 40s, salt and pepper hair, suit that cost more than Amara's monthly rent. He caught her eye and smiled. "Ms. Nwosu, heard a lot about you." "Have you?" "Vance mentioned you might be taking over the Bell case." The smile widened, said it should be interesting. Before Amara could respond, the side door opened and Bailiff Pike emerged. The same Pike from security. His eyes found Amara immediately, and something unpleasant flickered across his face. "All rise. The 4th District Court of Appeal is now in session." The Honorable Judge Thatcher Vance presiding. Vance entered through the door behind the bench. A tall man, 63 years old, silver hair swept back from a face that had probably been handsome once. Now it was just hard, carved by decades of power and the certainty that came with never being challenged. His eyes swept the courtroom, landed on Amara, stayed there one beat too long. "Be seated." The gavel fell once, unnecessarily. Vance liked the sound. Bell versus Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office. "Counsel, state your appearances." Hollis rose smoothly. "Graham Hollis for the defense, Your Honor." Amara stood. "Amara Nwosu for the plaintiff." Vance wrote something on his notepad. "Ms. Nwosu." He pronounced it correctly, which somehow made it worse. "I don't see a motion to compel discovery in the court's file." The words hit like a punch. Amara's briefcase sat at her feet, containing the receipt she'd photographed, the timestamp, the proof. "I filed that motion a short while ago, Your Honor. I have the receipt. The court has no record of any such filing." Vance's voice was flat, bored, as if her words meant nothing. "Ms. Burkett?" The clerk rose from her station below the bench. Same gray hair, same not quite friendly expression. "I've checked twice, Your Honor. No motion to compel in the system for this case. There must be some mistake." Amara opened her briefcase, pulled out the printed receipt. "I have documentation. The court doesn't rule based on receipts, Counselor." Vance cut her off. "Utter. If you failed to properly file your motion, that's your responsibility. Motion deemed not filed." "And Mrs. Nwosu?" He paused, savoring the moment. "Failure to meet filing deadlines is sanctionable. $200 a month." The gavel fell. $200 for a filing she'd made, for a document someone had made disappear. Amara didn't argue, didn't protest. She just opened her leather notebook and wrote, "That moment, $200. Sanction number 1, motion lost by clerk, Judge Vance presiding." When she looked up, Vance was watching her write. His expression, for just a moment, showed something like satisfaction. "We're adjourned until the gavel fell again." Case over. Round 1 to the judge, who'd already decided she would lose. The parking garage beneath the courthouse was dim and cool, fluorescent tubes casting pools of anemic light between stretches of shadow. Amara walked quickly, heels clicking against concrete, briefcase clutched against her side. She didn't see Hollis until he stepped out from between 2 SUVs. Tough break in there. Amara stopped. He stood between her and her car, hands in his pockets, that same smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Mr. Hollis, Graham, please." He stepped closer. "Look, I wanted to give you some friendly advice. Attorney to attorney, I didn't ask for advice." "No, but you need it." His smile faded. "Vance doesn't forget, doesn't forgive. That little stunt with the receipt, trying to make him look bad. I was documenting a procedural irregularity. You were challenging his authority in his own courtroom." Hollis's voice dropped. "That's a mistake. A lot of attorneys have made it. None of them are practicing in the 4th District anymore." Amara met his eyes. "Is that a threat?" "It's a warning." From someone who's been around long enough to know how things work. He stepped aside, clearing the path to her car. Some judges you can fight. Vance isn't one of them. Accept the loss. Move on. Find cases in other districts. And if I don't? Hollis shrugged. Then I'll see you in court, again and again, until there's nothing left to see. He walked away, footsteps echoing in the concrete cavern. Amara stood alone between the parked cars, her heart beating too fast, her hand gripping her briefcase until her knuckles ached. She opened her notebook and wrote, "That moment parking garage, Hollis. Implied threat to career." Until there's nothing left to see, the sanctions accumulated like interest on a debt she never owed. Later, $300 for improper margin formatting. Her margins were exactly 1 inch as required. She had the metadata to prove it. Vance didn't care. Later, $250 for failure to appear for status conference. The conference had been moved without notification, moved, according to the clerk's office, by system error. The notification email she never received was later found in a server archive, marked as sent, but with no delivery confirmation. Later, $400 for filing frivolous motion. The motion, a standard request for witness list, was identical to motions Hollis filed in other cases without issue. By later, Amara had paid over $2,000 in sanctions. Her savings account drained, her reputation in the legal community shifted from promising civil rights attorney to that woman Vance keeps sanctioning. The whispers followed her everywhere. At a bar association luncheon in later, she stood alone by the buffet table, watching clusters of attorneys chat and network and carefully avoid her corner of the room. Heard Vance has got it out for her. Must have done something to piss him off. You know how he is with certain types? Smart woman would transfer to another district. Amara heard every word, pretended not to, wrote nothing in her notebook. Not here, not in public. But she memorized the faces, the names, the ones who whispered, and the ones who turned away. An older attorney approached, white-haired, expensive suit, a Yale law tie that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. "Keep your documentation tight." He said it quietly, barely moving his lips, pretending to examine the shrimp cocktail. "You'll need it." Then he was gone, melting into the crowd before she could ask his name, or what he knew, or why he cared enough to warn her. Documentation. Everyone kept telling her to document, as if paper and timestamps could protect her from a man who controlled every courtroom she entered, every filing she made, every chance she had at justice for clients who had nowhere else to turn. But she documented anyway because it was the only weapon she had. The system was designed to break people like her. Keep watching to see if it succeeds or if she finds a way to break it first. The first physical confrontation came in later. Amara was leaving the courthouse late, nearly that moment. The hallway's empty except for cleaning crews and the occasional security guard. She'd stayed to file an emergency motion in the Bell case, another attempt to force discovery of the body cam footage. The sheriff's office kept losing. The stairwell door opened before she reached it. Bailiff Pike stood in the doorway, blocking her path. "Working late, counselor?" "Excuse me?" She tried to step around him. His hand shot out, grabbing her arm above the elbow, hard enough to leave marks. "I said working late? Let go of me." "Or what?" His face was inches from hers now, breath sour with coffee, and something stronger. "You'll write it in your little notebook? File a complaint? Who do you think's going to believe you?" Amara's heart hammered, but her voice stayed steady. "Badge number 3217. That day. That moment. Stairwell B, 4th floor. You're currently committing assault. I'm documenting." His grip tightened. Pain shot up her arm. "You think you're smart? Think you're better than everyone else because you went to some fancy law school?" He pulled her closer. "Let me tell you something about how things work around here. Vance says jump, we ask how high. And right now he wants you gone. Then he should do it himself instead of sending his errand boy." The slap came fast. His palm connected with her cheek, snapping her head sideways. She tasted copper where her teeth cut the inside of her mouth. Her vision blurred, steadied. The briefcase fell from her grip, papers scattering across the floor. Pike leaned in close. "That's a warning. Next time you won't see it coming." He released her arm and walked away, footsteps echoing down the empty hallway. Amara stood alone in the stairwell doorway, cheek burning, arm throbbing, papers at her feet. She didn't cry, didn't scream. She picked up her briefcase, gathered her documents, and pulled out her phone. 3 photographs. Her arm, already showing finger-shaped bruises. The stairwell door with its floor marker visible. Her own face, cheek red and swelling. Then she opened her notebook and wrote, "That moment Pike, physical assault, slap, bruising on left arm, verbal threat. Vance wants you gone." Her hand shook, but the words were clear. She reported the assault to courthouse security. The officer, taking her statement, young, nervous, clearly uncomfortable, wrote down everything with the careful detachment of someone who knew nothing would come of it. "We'll investigate, ma'am. The cameras. There are cameras in that hallway, in the stairwell. We'll check on that." They checked. The footage from that evening, specifically from that moment to that moment, was missing. "System malfunction," the security officer explained a week later. "Server error. Very unfortunate." Pike denied everything, claimed he'd been on the first floor. A supervisor, Sloan, according to the nameplate, confirmed the alibi. Case closed, no further action. Amara filed a complaint with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. They forwarded it to Internal Affairs. Internal Affairs forwarded it back to courthouse security. The circle completed itself as circles always did when the accused wore a badge. Her arm healed. The bruises faded, but she kept the photographs, kept the documentation, kept writing in her notebook, page after page after page. The bar complaint arrived in later. Amara was eating lunch at her desk, same office, same window overlooking a parking lot, when the email notification appeared. Florida Bar. Subject, notice of complaint filed. She read it 3 times. Complainant, the Honorable Thatcher Vance, 4th District Court of Appeal. Allegation, unprofessional conduct in violation of Florida. Bar Rule 4 to 8.4d, conduct prejudicial to the administration of justice. Specifics, pattern of missed deadlines, improper filings, disrespect for court procedures, and professional misconduct warranting review of respondent's fitness to practice law. Vance had filed a bar complaint against her. The man who'd sanctioned her 11 times in many months, whose clerk had lost her filings, whose bailiff had assaulted her in a stairwell, that man was now accusing her of unprofessional conduct. The complaint ran 6 pages. Every sanction listed as evidence of her incompetence. Every missed deadline documented as proof of her disorganization. Every motion denied framed as evidence that she filed frivolous pleadings. It was, Amara realized, a masterpiece of institutional gaslighting. Her attempts to seek justice rewritten as evidence of her unfitness to practice law. She closed the email, closed her eyes, breathed. Then she opened a new document and began writing her response. 47 pages. Every sanction addressed with receipts, timestamps, and metadata. Every missed filing documented with clerk's office records she'd obtained through public information requests. Every frivolous motion compared to identical motions filed by other attorneys, white attorneys, that had been granted without comment. The bar investigation would take many months. Many months of career limbo, of clients asking questions, of colleagues avoiding her, of Sylvia Hartwell suggesting, gently at first, then less gently, that perhaps she should consider other opportunities. Many months of documenting, of waiting, of wondering if this would be the thing that finally destroyed her. But she wasn't alone in wondering. In a glass-walled office in Tallahassee, 400 miles north, a different kind of file was being assembled. A file marked confidential. A file with a name that wasn't Thatcher Vance's at the top. The governor's chief of staff had been watching the 4th District for months. Statistical anomalies, sanction patterns, demographic data that painted a picture too clear to ignore. 17 black attorneys sanctioned in several years, she said to the governor during their weekly briefing. 0 white attorneys. Statistical probability of that occurring randomly, 0.01%. The governor, first term, ambitious, already thinking about the Senate race down the road, studied the numbers. And this attorney? Noosu? Still practicing? Barely. Vance filed a bar complaint to finish her off, but our sources say it's going to be dismissed. Insufficient evidence. Because there is no evidence. Because she documented everything. Receipts, timestamps, metadata. The woman's been building a case without even knowing it. The governor was quiet for a long moment. The 4th District appellate seat. Vance has been blocking our judicial reform candidates for years. He has. What if we don't just block him back? What if we go around him entirely? The chief of staff smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. Amara didn't know about Tallahassee, didn't know about the files being compiled, the statistical analyses being run, the conversations happening in corridors of power she'd never walked. She knew only this. Later, letter from the Florida bar. Case dismissed. Insufficient evidence. She read it in her apartment, alone, with a glass of wine she'd earned and a notebook full of evidence she might never use. Case dismissed. Months of accusations, of professional limbo, of whispered speculation, all ending with 3 words and no apology. No acknowledgement that the complaint was frivolous. No censure of the complainant. No consequences for the man who'd tried to destroy her career with paperwork and accusations. Just insufficient evidence. Case dismissed. She poured herself another glass and stared at the wall. The Bell case was still pending. Vance was still on the bench. Pike was still patrolling the courthouse. Burkett was still losing filings. Nothing had changed. Everything had changed. She just didn't know it yet. Later, the email arrived before Amara had finished her first cup of coffee. Unknown sender. Justice Watcher that year. Subject line, you're not alone. She almost deleted it. Spam, phishing, someone selling something. But the attachment stopped her. Vance sanctions over several years. XLSX. She opened it. The spreadsheet was immaculate. Years of data compiled from public court records, cross-referenced with Florida bar registrations, names, dates, case numbers, sanction amounts, and one column that made her breath catch. Race. 17 black attorneys. 0 white attorneys. 6 years. Average sanction for black attorneys, $412. Average for white, 0. She recognized some of the names. Terrence Booker. She remembered hearing he'd left the state. Couldn't handle the pressure, people said. Now she knew. 6 sanctions in years, totaling over $2,000, and a bar complaint that was withdrawn under circumstances the spreadsheet labeled unknown. Kendrick Holloway, Arlen, Talia Greer, Julian Cross. Names that had disappeared from 4th District courtrooms one by one, year by year. And at the bottom, court reporter Alvarez. Transcripts available on request. Alvarez. The woman who typed everything. The woman who'd witnessed every sanction, every motion denied, every humiliation delivered from that bench. Amara forwarded the email to an encrypted address she'd set up months ago, made 3 backup copies, and wrote in her notebook. Anonymous tip. Spreadsheet, 17 names, pattern confirmed. Source, unknown, contact, Alvarez. Then she started making phone calls. The first attorney who agreed to talk was Julian Cross, disbarred in that year for failure to respond to bar inquiry. He met Amara at a coffee shop in Miami, far from Palm Beach, far from Vance's reach. They grind you down. His voice was flat, mechanical, like someone describing a dream they couldn't wake from. First sanction, you think it's a mistake. Second, you think maybe you did something wrong. Third, fourth, fifth, you start wondering if you're crazy. You're not crazy. I know that now. He laughed, hollow. Too late, but I know it. The filing I got sanctioned for, I have the original receipt. Clerk's office timestamp, everything. But by the time I tried to appeal, they said the original was lost and my copy was insufficient documentation. Did you fight it? I tried. Got another sanction for filing frivolous appeal. He stared down into his coffee. After a while, you stop fighting. You just want it to stop. Amara wrote everything down. Marcus was one of 11 who agreed to talk. 11 attorneys with stories that matched hers, like fingerprints on the same weapon. She was building something. She didn't know what to call it yet. Case file, evidence, ammunition. But it was taking shape. Page by page, name by name, sanction by sanction. Later, the coffee shop where Amara met Rosa Alvarez was small, tucked between a dry cleaner and a check cashing place. Far enough from downtown that courthouse employees wouldn't wander in by accident. Alvarez arrived exactly on time, out of her professional attire. She looked smaller, more human. She held her coffee cup with both hands like she needed the warmth. 8 years. Her voice was barely above a whisper. 8 years I've been transcribing his courtroom. I've seen everything. Why now? Why reach out? Alvarez was quiet for a long moment. My daughter finished law school last year, passed the bar. She wants to do civil rights work like you. She looked up. I can't watch her walk into that courtroom knowing what I know. I can't stay silent while he does to her what he did to you. What can you give me? Officially? Nothing. I copy and transcribe. That's my job. What I do with my personal backup copies? She smiled faintly. That's just good record keeping. Transcripts, every sanction he's issued, every motion denied, every sidebar conference where he said things he thought weren't being recorded. Alvarez's eyes hardened. He forgets I'm there. They all do. The woman in the corner with the machine. Invisible. Forgettable. But I hear everything. Amara leaned forward. I need you to keep those records safe, officially. Through proper channels, proper backups, if anyone ever asks. I'm just doing my job. Alvarez nodded. That's all I've ever done. They shook hands outside the coffee shop. Alvarez walked toward the bus stop. Amara walked toward her car. Two women who'd spent years being invisible in a system designed to overlook them, now building something the system couldn't ignore. The call came on the last day of later, that moment area code 850 Tallahassee. Amara let it ring once, twice, 3 times before answering. Nwosu? This is governor's office. The governor would like to meet with you regarding a judicial position. The words didn't process, couldn't process. She stood in her kitchen, coffee growing cold, sunlight streaming through the window, and wondered if she was still dreaming. I'm sorry. A what? A judicial position. The governor has reviewed your qualifications and would like to discuss an appointment to the 4th District Court of Appeal. 4th District? Vance's district? The courtroom where she'd been sanctioned 17 times. Threatened, assaulted, and nearly destroyed. When? Tomorrow afternoon. That moment, Tallahassee. Transportation will be arranged. She wrote the details down with a hand that trembled only slightly. After she hung up, she sat in her kitchen for a long time, watching dust motes dance in the morning light, trying to make sense of a universe that had spent 3 years trying to break her and was now possibly offering her the keys to the kingdom. But Amara Nwosu hadn't survived Thatcher Vance by believing in fairy tales. She opened her notebook and wrote, "Call from Governor's Office. Judicial Appointment Meeting. 4th District. Verify independently before proceeding." Then she started making phone calls. Everything she documented, everything she survived led to this moment. But the real twist is still coming. Stay until the end to see who ends up on whose bench. A seat. The governor's office was smaller than Amara expected. She'd imagined something grand: oil paintings, mahogany furniture, the trappings of power that powerful people surrounded themselves with. Instead, she found a functional space: clean lines, modern furniture, a window overlooking the Capitol grounds. The chief of staff was a woman in her 50s, gray suit, minimal jewelry, the kind of face that gave nothing away. "Ms. Nwosu, thank you for coming." They shook hands. Amara took the offered seat. "I'm sure you have questions?" "Several." The chief of staff smiled. "Let me answer the first one. This is real. The governor has identified you as a candidate for Chief Judge of the 4th District Court of Appeal." Chief Judge. Not just a seat on the bench. The seat. The one that presided over all the others. The one that would make her Thatcher Vance's superior. Yes. Amara let that sink in. The man who'd tried to destroy her career, the man who'd sanctioned her 17 times, the man whose bailiff had slapped her in a stairwell. She would be his boss. Why me? The chief of staff opened a folder. Thick, dog-eared, clearly well-reviewed. You documented everything: receipts, timestamps, metadata. You built a case without knowing you were building it. He slid a paper across the desk. 17 black attorneys sanctioned in 6 years. Statistical anomaly that caught our attention many months earlier. You're not the victim, Ms. Nwosu. You're the witness. The only one who kept records that could survive legal scrutiny. You've been watching me. We've been watching Vance. You happen to be in his crosshairs. The chief of staff leaned forward. The 4th District has been a problem for years. Judicial misconduct complaints that go nowhere. Pattern and practice violations that never get investigated. The governor wants to reform the court. You. She pointed at Amara. You're the reform. Amara stared at the paper. Statistical analysis. Pattern evidence. Everything she'd compiled in her notebook reflected back at her in official language. If I accept? When you accept? If I accept, Amara repeated. The first file on my desk will be a judicial misconduct complaint against Thatcher Vance, filed with the Judicial Qualifications Commission. I'll have to recuse. The JQC already reviewed the recusal question. 28 U.S.C. Section 455 allows a judge to preside over proceedings when they were the victim of the conduct being investigated. The purpose is accountability, not protection for the accused. That's legal? Yes? Unusual? Certainly. The chief of staff smiled. Poetic? We like to think so. Amara looked at the folder, looked at the window, looked at her hands, still bearing faint scars from that night in the stairwell, when a bailiff taught her exactly how much the system valued her safety. 3 years, 17 sanctions, 1 assault, 1 bar complaint, countless humiliations, large and small. And now, I have conditions. Name them. The appointment ceremony took place in the Florida Supreme Court chamber 3 weeks later. Amara stood before the Chief Justice in judicial robes that felt heavier than any garment she'd ever worn. The weight wasn't physical. It was historical, institutional, the accumulated expectation of everyone who'd worn these robes before her, and everyone who would watch her wear them now. The gallery was full. Sylvia Hartwell looking shell-shocked. Other attorneys from Hartwell and Associates. The 11 attorneys she'd interviewed, Cross and the others, all seated in a row, all watching with expressions she couldn't quite read. And in the back, almost hidden, Rosa Alvarez holding her daughter's hand. By the authority vested in me by the Constitution of Florida, I hereby administer the oath of office to Amara Nwosu as Chief Judge of the 4th District Court of Appeal. The words echoed in the marble chamber. Do you solemnly swear to support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Florida, and to faithfully discharge the duties of the office of Chief Judge? I do. Then by the power vested in me, I declare you installed as Chief Judge. Later you serve with wisdom, integrity, and justice. Applause filled the chamber. Amara shook hands, accepted congratulations, smiled for photographs, but her eyes kept drifting to the door, searching for faces that weren't there. Thatcher Vance hadn't come. Neither had Graham Hollis. Neither had Russell Pike. But they would learn soon enough. The whole 4th District would learn. The woman they'd tried to destroy was now wearing the robes, her first morning as Chief Judge. Amara arrived. The office was larger than she expected. Corner suite, mahogany desk, windows overlooking the downtown skyline. Someone had placed fresh flowers on the credenza. Someone else had stacked files on her desk in neat towers, each flagged with colored tabs indicating priority. She ignored the flowers, ignored the view, walked straight to the desk, and picked up the file on top. Red tab, highest priority. Cover page. In the matter of the Honorable Thatcher Vance, Judicial Qualifications Commission, hearing scheduled, exactly years to the day from when her motion to compel had disappeared from the clerk's office. She opened the file. The complaint was thorough. Statistical analysis of sanction patterns, affidavits from 11 attorneys, transcripts highlighted and annotated, emails between Vance and courthouse staff obtained through public records requests, and a section she hadn't seen before. Security footage from the footage she'd been told was lost. Recovered, according to the technical report, from a backup server that courthouse IT had forgotten existed. The footage showed Elaine Burkett receiving a filing from a woman who was unmistakably Amara, and then placing that filing in a drawer instead of the processing bin. Not lost. Hidden. Amara stared at the screen capture for a long time. Years of sanctions, years of humiliation, years of everyone telling her she must have done something wrong. And here was the proof that she hadn't, that she never had. She closed the file and wrote in her notebook, the same leather notebook, now on its 6th volume. First day as Chief Judge. Vance file received. Hearing in a short while. Justice, maybe finally arriving. The door opened. Her clerk, new, young, nervous, poked her head in. Chief Judge, Judge Vance is here. He says he needs to speak with you urgently. Amara looked up from her notebook, smiled. Send him in. Thatcher Vance looked older than she remembered. Years had carved deeper lines into his face, silvered more of his hair, added a slight stoop to shoulders that had once radiated authority. He stood in her doorway, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked uncertain. Chief Judge, Judge Vance. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. Please sit. He sat. His eyes moved around the office. Her office. Cataloging the changes, the flowers, the files on the desk. When his gaze landed on the red-tabbed folder, something flickered across his face. I assume you know why I'm here. I assume you're going to tell me. The JQC complaint. He leaned forward. It's politically motivated. The governor has had it out for the 4th District for years. This is Judge Vance. Amara's voice was quiet but carried an edge that stopped him mid-sentence. Let me be clear about something. We are not colleagues discussing judicial philosophy. We are not equals debating procedure. You are a respondent in a misconduct investigation. I am the chief judge who will preside over your hearing. Anything you say to me now can and will become part of the record. Vance's mouth opened, closed. So, I suggest, Amara continued, that you speak with your attorney before saying anything else. The hearing is in a short while. You'll have full opportunity to present your defense then. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The man who had sanctioned her 17 times, who had tried to end her career, who had sent his bailiff to intimidate her in a stairwell, sat across from her desk, in her office, in her courtroom, and had absolutely no power. This isn't over, he said finally. No. Amara met his eyes. It's just beginning. Vance stood, walked to the door, paused. You think you've won something? But the system, Amara interrupted, protected you for decades. It's not going to protect you anymore. She watched him leave, watched the door close behind him. Then she opened her notebook and wrote, "That moment, Vance. This isn't over." No, it isn't. Outside her window, the sun was rising over West Palm Beach, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. A new day, a new court, a new chance at something that might actually look like justice. But Amara knew better than anyone, in the 4th District, nothing was ever that simple. The JQC hearing was scheduled but on that day, several days before justice was supposed to arrive, Amara received another visitor. Elaine Burkett appeared in her office doorway, looking nothing like the confident clerk who had stamped documents and lost filings and testified that she'd checked twice. She was crying. "Chief Judge, I have to tell you, Ms. Burkett." Amara gestured to the chair. "Sit down." Burkett sat. Her hands twisted in her lap, fingers interlacing and separating like she was trying to solve a puzzle only she could see. "I did it." The words tumbled out. "The filings, your filings. I did what he told me to do." Vance said it was standard procedure for certain attorneys, that everyone did it, that it wasn't really Ms. Burkett. Amara held up a hand. "I need you to stop right now." The clerk's eyes widened. "But I want to." "What you want is to confess, and what I need to tell you is that anything you say to me becomes part of the official record. You need an attorney, you need representation before you say another word. I don't care about I care." Amara's voice softened. "I spent years being ground down by a system that didn't care whether I had representation or documentation or rights. I'm not going to do the same thing to you, even if you deserve it." Burkett stared at her, tears still streaming. "You're not going to—" "I'm going to give you the courtesy you never gave me. Get a lawyer. Prepare a statement. If you want to cooperate with the investigation, do it properly, through proper channels, with proper protection." Amara stood, walked to the door, opened it. "Now please leave my office." Burkett stood slowly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm sorry." The words were barely audible. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry." Amara watched her walk down the hallway, shoulders shaking with sobs. Then she closed the door, sat at her desk, and wrote, "Burkett. Attempted confession. Referred to counsel. Not like them. Never like them." Several days before the hearing, Amara was reviewing evidence in her office when her clerk knocked. "Chief Judge, there's a situation." "What kind of situation?" "Bailiff Pike. He's been escorted from the building. Security says the clerk hesitated. They say he was found in the evidence room trying to access the Vance files." Amara was on her feet before the clerk finished speaking. The evidence room was a disaster. File boxes overturned, papers scattered across the floor, a filing cabinet with its lock visibly pried open. And in the corner, handcuffed and bleeding from a cut on his forehead, Russell Pike. "He fought," the security officer explained. "We found him trying to remove documents. When we confronted him, he threw a punch." Amara surveyed the damage. The Vance files, the ones scheduled for the hearing, were strewn across a metal table, pages out of order, but apparently intact. Were any documents removed? We don't think so. We caught him before he could get out. She walked to where Pike sat slumped against the wall. His eyes found hers, and even now cuffed, caught, finished, there was defiance in them. You. He spat the word. You think this changes anything? You think Russell Pike? Amara's voice cut through his tirade. You are under arrest for attempted destruction of evidence, unauthorized access to secured materials, and assault on a security officer. You have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you use it. She turned away before he could respond, walked out of the evidence room, walked to her office, sat at her desk with hands that trembled only slightly. Not like them. Never like them. But sometimes, justice required putting people in handcuffs. The hearing convened on that day sharp. JQC hearing room, Tallahassee. Formal setting, 3 commissioners at the raised dais, court reporter Rosa Alvarez specifically requested at her station. Gallery packed with attorneys and journalists, and faces Amara recognized from years of being on the other side of institutional power. Thatcher Vance sat at the respondents' table, silver hair perfect, suit impeccable, expression carefully neutral. His attorney, Everett Sloan, high-powered, expensive, sat beside him shuffling papers with the confidence of a man who'd never lost a case like this, because there had never been a case like this. In the matter of the Honorable Thatcher Vance, the lead commissioner, a woman in her 60s, no-nonsense demeanor, opened proceedings. This hearing will determine whether sufficient evidence exists to support allegations of judicial misconduct. Chief Judge Nwosu will preside. Amara took her seat at the center of the dais. The robes felt heavier than ever. She looked at Vance, decades on the bench, hundreds of cases, countless attorneys crushed under the weight of his authority, and saw something she'd never seen before: fear. The commission may proceed, she said. Conrad Vale, JQC investigator, took the stand first. Exhibit A sanctions data over several years. He clicked a remote. The screen displayed spreadsheets, her spreadsheets, professionalized and authenticated. 17 black attorneys sanctioned, 0 white attorneys. Statistical probability of this pattern occurring randomly, less than 0.01%. The gallery murmured. Exhibit B. Affidavits from 11 attorneys describing similar patterns of lost filings, perpetual sanctions, and professional retaliation. More murmurs. Exhibit C. Court reporter transcripts demonstrating disparate treatment in oral rulings. Vance's attorney rose. Objection. These transcripts are incomplete and taken out of context. The transcripts, Vale continued, were authenticated by court reporter Rosa Alvarez, who has served in Judge Vance's courtroom for years. Every word is documented, every sidebar recorded. Amara watched Vance's face as transcript after transcript was read into the record. His expression didn't change, but his hands gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles went white. The security footage came next. That moment, clerk's office. On screen, a woman, unmistakably Amara, handed documents to a clerk behind the counter. The clerk, unmistakably Elaine Burkett and Basit, took the documents, stamped them, and then stopped playback, Sloan shouted. Sloan, this footage is authenticated by IT specialist Victor Ramos, Vale said calmly. Recovered from backup servers on chain of custody, documented per JQC Evidence Protocol 7.3. The footage continued. Burkett took the stamped documents and placed them in a drawer, not the processing bin, not the filing system, a drawer. The filing Ms. Nwosu submitted that day, Vale said, was never entered into the court system. Judge Vance subsequently sanctioned her $200 for failure to file. The gallery erupted. The lead commissioner banged her gavel. Order! We will have order! Amara sat perfectly still. She'd seen the footage before, knew what it showed, but watching it in this room with Vance's face gray and Burkett absent, medical leave her attorney claimed, with the truth finally visible on a screen for everyone to see, something loosened in her chest, something she'd carried for years. Vance's defense was what she expected: deny, deflect, minimize. These sanctions were issued pursuant to legitimate procedural concerns, Sloan argued. Judge Vance applied the same standards to all attorneys who appeared before him. Then explain, the lead commissioner asked, why no white attorneys received sanctions for comparable procedural issues. Coincidence? Small sample size? The statistics are being manipulated to... Manipulated how? These are public court records. Sloan had no answer. The hearing continued for hours. Witness after witness, document after document, the architecture of decades of bias laid bare in a room full of people who could no longer pretend not to see it. Finally, the commissioners retired to deliberate. They returned in a short while. The Judicial Qualifications Commission finds sufficient evidence to support allegations of discriminatory conduct, abuse of judicial discretion, and conduct unbecoming a member of the judiciary. The lead commissioner's voice was steady, formal, final. We recommend that Judge Thatcher Vance be suspended without pay, effective immediately pending further investigation and formal charges. This matter will be referred to the Florida Supreme Court for final determination. Vance didn't move, didn't speak, just sat there staring at nothing as decades of power evaporated in a short while. Sloan was already on his feet talking about appeals, about procedural challenges, about fighting this politically motivated persecution, but his words seemed to come from very far away. Amara watched Vance rise so mechanically, like a man moving through water. His eyes found hers across the room. No words, no threats, just recognition, the understanding that the woman he'd tried to destroy was now wearing the robes he'd thought were his birthright. Then he turned and walked out, and the door closed behind him, and it was over. Except it wasn't. 2 weeks later, Amara received an email from an address she didn't recognize. Subject line empty, body containing only one sentence. Vance wasn't acting alone. Attachment, 3 emails. Sender redacted. Recipient, Vance, Thatcher. Subject lines: re-Nwosu situation, re-new attorney handle with discretion, re-backup plan if sanctions fail. The bodies were partially redacted, but enough remained to make clear Vance had been coordinating with someone. Someone with enough power to warrant careful language, careful planning, careful concealment. Someone whose name was blocked out with thick black bars. Amara stared at the screen for a long time. Then she opened her notebook, 7th volume now, leather cover worn smooth from years of handling, and wrote, "That day, anonymous tip. Vance had help. Sender, unknown. Conspiracy extends beyond single judge. Investigation continues." Outside her window, West Palm Beach sparkled under the spring sun. She had won. Vance was suspended. Justice, partial, incomplete, but real, had been served. But somewhere in that city, in some office she hadn't found yet, someone was reading the same news coverage and wondering how long before she came for them. Amara closed her notebook. The answer was not long. Not long at all. The email glowed on Amara's screen like an open wound. 3 attachments. 3 emails with sender names blacked out. 3 pieces of evidence that everything she thought she'd won, the hearing, the suspension, the taste of justice after years of poison, was nothing but the surface of something far more rotten. Vance wasn't acting alone. She read the words again, then again. The meaning didn't change. The implication spread through her mind like fractures in glass, each crack revealing another weakness in what she'd believed was solid ground. Someone had been pulling strings, someone powerful enough to require careful language in official emails, someone whose identity was worth protecting even now, even after Vance's fall. Amara saved the email to 3 separate locations: cloud storage, encrypted drive, A flash drive she would deposit in a safety box across town before sunrise. Then she printed the attachments, locked them in her desk drawer with hands that didn't quite shake, and sat in the growing darkness of her office while the sun bled out over West Palm Beach. 3 years, 17 sanctions, one assault that left bruises she could still feel when the weather changed, one bar complaint designed to end her career. She had thought Thatcher Vance was the enemy, the architect of her suffering, the source of all that institutional venom. Now she understood. Vance was the weapon, not the hand that aimed it. She opened her notebook and wrote in the margin beside today's date, "Conspiracy confirmed. Unknown principal. Investigation required. Trust no one inside the system until source identified." Then picked up her phone and made a call she had hoped she would never need to make. 2 rings. 3. A click. Chief Judge Nwosu. The voice on the other end was measured, unsurprised. "I was wondering when you would reach out." Conrad Vale, JQC. Investigator. The man who had assembled the case against Vance piece by methodical piece. The only person in the entire 4th District apparatus that Amara was reasonably certain had not been bought, threatened, or compromised. "We need to meet tonight somewhere that isn't the courthouse." A pause. She could hear him breathing, calculating. "There's a coffee shop on Flagler, back booth. I can be there in an hour." The line went dead. Amara gathered the printouts, checked that her office door was locked, and walked out into the warm Florida evening. Somewhere in this city, someone was wondering whether she had found the emails, whether she had started asking questions, whether she would be smart enough to stop. Let them wonder. She was finished being the one kept in the dark. The coffee shop smelled like burned espresso and old newspapers. Vale was already seated when she arrived, a cup of black coffee untouched before him, eyes tracking every movement near the entrance. He looked older than she remembered from the hearing, more tired. The kind of exhaustion that came from knowing too much and being able to prove too little. Amara slid into the seat across from him and placed the printouts on the scarred wooden table. Where did these come from? Anonymous email. Same pattern as the spreadsheet I received before the hearing. Vale picked up the first page, tilting it toward the weak overhead light. His face revealed nothing, but his fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around the paper. You recognize something. The email headers. The formatting structure. This came from inside the court system. Someone with administrative server access sent these. Burkett? Burkett is on indefinite medical leave and surrounded by lawyers trying to negotiate a plea deal. She's not sending anonymous tips to anyone. She's trying to save herself. Vale set the page down and tapped the redacted sender field. This is someone else. Someone who has been watching much longer than any of us realized. Amara studied his expression. You know who it is. I have suspicions, but suspicions are not evidence. He leaned back, the vinyl seat creaking beneath him. And if my suspicions are correct, we're going to need mountains more than 3 redacted emails to bring this down. Then tell me who you suspect. The silence stretched. Background jazz played from speakers mounted in the ceiling. A couple argued quietly near the window. Normal life continuing while something decidedly abnormal took shape in the back booth. The 4th District doesn't exist in isolation, Vale said finally. Vance had power, yes, but he was never the most powerful person in the building. There's a reason he survived decades of complaints, decades of patterns that anyone with eyes could see. Someone was protecting him. Someone was making problems disappear. Who? That's the question. Vale pulled out his phone, scrolled through something. I've been investigating judicial misconduct for many years. In that time, I've opened files on 37 judges in the 4th District. 34 of those investigations were shut down before they ever reached a hearing. Closed for insufficient evidence or procedural concerns or any of a dozen other bureaucratic phrases that mean the same thing. He turned the phone so she could see the screen. Want to guess whose signature appears on every single closure? The name hit her like cold water. Sterling Hawthorne, Chief Administrative Judge, many years in the position. Controls case assignments, budget allocations, personnel decisions, and most importantly, the internal routing of misconduct complaints. Every accusation that comes through this district crosses his desk before it reaches the JQC. He decides what gets forwarded and what gets filed away in a cabinet no one ever opens. Filed away meaning destroyed, meaning disappeared. Just like your motion disappeared years ago. Just like the security footage from the stairwell disappeared. Just like everything inconvenient in the 4th District seems to evaporate when it threatens the wrong people. Amara stared at the printouts, the redacted sender field, the careful language, the evidence of coordination that stopped just short of naming names. Someone inside Hawthorne's operation is leaking these. That's my read. Why now? Why risk it? Vale shrugged. Conscience? Self-preservation? The understanding that when ships start taking on water, it's better to be the one handing out life jackets than the one chained to the anchor. He stood, dropping a crumpled bill on the table beside his untouched coffee. I'll keep pulling threads from my end. You keep documenting from yours. And Amara, she looked up at the use of her first name. Watch your back. Sterling Hawthorne has survived many years by knowing exactly when someone becomes a liability and exactly how to cut them loose. Right now, Thatcher Vance is his biggest problem. If Hawthorne decides you're the second biggest, then what? Vale's smile held no warmth. Then I hope your documentation is as thorough as everyone says it is. He walked out into the night. Amara sat alone with her printouts and her cold coffee, and the growing certainty that pulling this thread might unravel everything, including herself. The conspiracy runs deeper than anyone imagined. Stay with this story to see how far it goes and who falls when the truth finally comes out. The investigation into Sterling Hawthorne began the next morning. Amara arrived at her office before the cleaning crew finished their rounds, pulled the Vance case files from their secured cabinet, and began reading with fresh eyes, not looking for evidence against Vance anymore. That chapter was closed. Now she was looking for connections, patterns, the invisible architecture that held corruption in place. The first thread revealed itself within hours. Vance's case assignments over the previous several years showed a clear design. High-profile civil rights cases were consistently routed to his courtroom. Police brutality lawsuits, employment discrimination claims, voting rights challenges, cases that benefited from a judge willing to rule against plaintiffs and a clerk willing to lose inconvenient filings. Every routing decision bore the same authorization signature. H. Hawthorne, Administrative Assignment. The second thread emerged by early afternoon. Budget records for the 4th District contained unusual line items. Consulting fees paid to something called Meridian Legal Services, LLC. The individual amounts were small enough to avoid automatic audit triggers, but they added up. $47,000 over years flowing to a company that provided no discernible services. Amara ran a corporate registry search. Meridian Legal Services was registered through a law firm in Tallahassee. The managing partner of that firm was Everett Sloan. The same Everett Sloan who had defended Thatcher Vance at the JQC hearing. The same Everett Sloan whose substantial legal fees had apparently been paid by someone other than his client. The third thread required assistance. Amara found Rosa Alvarez in her small office adjacent to courtroom 4C, surrounded by transcription equipment and filing cabinets stuffed with years of recorded proceedings. I need you to pull something for me. Amara closed the door behind her, drew the blinds. Transcripts from any proceeding where Sterling Hawthorne appeared as a witness or formal participant. Everything from the past several years. Alvarez's face lost color. Chief Judge, If Hawthorne discovers I'm pulling those records for you specifically, he won't discover anything. You're performing routine archival maintenance, ensuring proper backup procedures. That's part of your job description. Routine maintenance. Alvarez laughed without any trace of humor. I've held this position for years. I know what routine looks like, and this? She gestured at the request form in Amara's hand. This is going to get one of us destroyed. Not destroyed, maybe investigated, maybe pressured, maybe dragged through the same procedures they used against me for years. Amara met her eyes steadily. But not destroyed. Men like Hawthorne don't eliminate people with violence. They do it with paperwork and procedures and the machinery of the same system we're about to use against them. Alvarez was quiet for a long moment. Her eyes moved to a framed photograph on her desk. A young woman in graduation robes holding a law degree, smiling at the camera with unmistakable pride. My daughter Marisol passed the bar last month. She wants to practice civil rights law here in the 4th District. I know. I told her it was too dangerous, that the system was designed to crush people like her, like us. Alvarez's voice cracked slightly. She told me that someone had to fight anyway, that if everyone who knew the truth stayed quiet, nothing would ever change. She sounds wise. She sounds like she's going to get hurt. Alvarez turned back to her computer, fingers hovering over the keyboard. But she's not wrong, and neither are you. She took the request form and began typing. The transcripts arrived at Amara's office shortly before that moment that evening. A sealed envelope marked Confidential Archival Review. Alvarez delivered it personally, said nothing, and left without making eye contact. Amara spread the contents across her desk and began reading. What she found made her physically ill. Sterling Hawthorne had provided character testimony in 17 separate disciplinary proceedings over the past several years. In every single case, the subject was a white male judge facing misconduct allegations. In every single case, Hawthorne had vouched for the accused's exemplary character and unwavering commitment to judicial integrity. In every single case, the charges had been dismissed or quietly reduced to private censure with no public record. But that wasn't what turned her stomach. The 18th file did that. A disciplinary proceeding she had never heard mentioned against a judge whose name made her breath catch. Simone Reddick, black, female, appointed to the 4th District bench in that year, accused of failure to maintain proper courtroom decorum after she ruled against a police union in an excessive force case. The complaint had been filed by Sterling Hawthorne personally. Reddick had resigned months after the complaint was lodged, citing family reasons. The disciplinary file was sealed, the records archived, the entire affair buried under layers of institutional forgetting. Amara had met Simone Reddick once, briefly, at a bar association function during her first year of practice. She remembered thinking, here is someone who understands, someone who knows what this fight costs and chooses to fight anyway. Now she knew exactly what it had cost Simone Reddick. She wrote in her notebook, Reddick file located, Hawthorne filed original complaint. Pattern extends beyond Vance. How many others? How many careers ended? How many lives derailed? Then she picked up her phone and dialed a number she had saved years ago, never expecting to use it. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, how may I direct your call? The federal agents arrived soon afterward. Special Agent Marin Cole led the team. Mid-40s, severe features, the kind of eyes that had witnessed too much institutional rot to be surprised by anything anymore. Her partner, Agent Elias Chen, was younger and quieter, the one who filled legal pads with notes while Cole conducted interviews. They met in Amara's chambers with every door locked and every window shade drawn. I want to be absolutely clear about what you're alleging. Cole arranged the evidence across Amara's desk in precise rows. Reddick's file, the budget anomalies, the routing patterns, the anonymous emails. You're claiming that the chief administrative judge of this district has been orchestrating a coordinated campaign of discrimination against black attorneys and judges for more than a decade. I'm not claiming anything. Amara kept her voice level. I'm presenting documentation. What it demonstrates is for investigators to determine. Documentation obtained how exactly? Public records requests, archival reviews conducted pursuant to my administrative authority, and anonymous tips from sources I cannot identify because I don't know who they are. Cole exchanged a glance with Chen. Something passed between them. Professional skepticism tempered by professional interest. Anonymous sources inside the court system, sources who haven't revealed themselves despite the obvious risks involved in leaking this material. Correct, and you expect us to open a pattern or practice investigation based on anonymous tips and circumstantial connections that might not survive evidentiary challenge? Amara leaned forward. I expect you to enforce federal law. 18 U.S.C. Section 242 criminalizes deprivation of civil rights under color of law. 42 U.S.C. Section 1983 creates civil liability for the same conduct. These aren't obscure provisions. They're the backbone of federal civil rights enforcement, and the evidence I'm presenting, even the circumstantial portions, establishes probable cause for further investigation. I'm familiar with the relevant statutes, Chief Judge. Then you're familiar with what this documentation reveals. 17 black attorneys sanctioned by a single judge over several years, while 0 white attorneys received sanctions. 1 black judge forced from the bench through a fabricated complaint. Statistical patterns that could not possibly occur through random chance. Budget records showing covert payments to an attorney who later defended the accused judge. And emails redacted, yes, but emails demonstrating coordination at the highest levels of this court. Cole studied her for a long moment. Then she gathered the documents into a neat stack and stood. I'm not making promises. Pattern or practice investigations require substantial resources and institutional commitment. They take months, sometimes years, and they require cooperation from local officials who frequently have every incentive not to cooperate. I'm the chief judge of this district. I will cooperate fully. And if the investigation leads where you believe it leads, if it implicates people with political connections and institutional power, people with the resources to make your professional life extremely difficult. Amara thought about Russell Pike in The Stairwell, the impact of his palm against her cheek, the way the bruises had faded while the memory remained vivid. She thought about years of sanctions and whispers and the methodical demolition of everything she had built. Agent Cole, I spent years being made an example of, having my career systematically dismantled as a warning to anyone else who might challenge the established order. She met the agent's eyes without flinching. Now it's my turn to set the example. Whatever this investigation requires from me, I'm prepared to provide. Cole nodded slowly. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite respect, closer to recognition. Then we'll be in contact soon. They departed through a service entrance, avoiding the main corridors where courthouse employees might observe federal agents conferring with the chief judge. Amara watched them go, then she returned to her desk and added to her notebook, DOJ meeting completed, investigation possible, timeline uncertain, Hawthorne remains unaware, advantage temporary. She underlined the final word twice. Then she began preparing for the confrontation she knew was coming. The first indication that Hawthorne had noticed came days later. Amara arrived at her office to discover a note centered on her desk, hand-delivered, no envelope. Expensive cream-colored paper covered in elegant calligraphy. Chief Judge Nwosu, I've been meaning to arrange a meeting to discuss administrative matters affecting our district. Perhaps lunch this Friday? I know an excellent private club, my treat, of course. Sterling. The handwriting matched the congratulatory card she had received after her appointment. The same careful loops, the same precise spacing, the same veneer of warmth that meant absolutely nothing. She showed the note to Vale that afternoon in a park 3 blocks from the courthouse. He's probing. Vale turned the paper over, examining it like physical evidence. Testing your reaction, seeing whether you'll accept, decline, or show some indication of fear. What should I do? Accept, attend, listen more than you speak, reveal nothing incriminating, learn everything possible. He handed the note back. And record every single word. The restaurant occupied the top floor of a private club in Palm Beach proper, the kind of establishment where membership required 7 figures in liquid assets and introductions from existing members. Discretion was the primary service offered. The food was almost incidental. Hawthorne was already seated when Amara arrived, sparkling water before him, smile fixed in place, silver hair immaculate. "Chief Judge, thank you for making time." She took the chair across from him. "Thank you for the invitation. I realize we've crossed paths at various functions over the years, but I don't believe we've ever had a genuine conversation. I wanted to correct that oversight. I appreciate the thought." A server materialized, took their orders, and vanished with the practiced invisibility that expensive establishments cultivated. "I'll speak directly, if you don't mind." Hawthorne folded his hands on the white tablecloth. The Vance situation was deeply unfortunate. Thatcher was a colleague, someone I considered a friend for many years. The evidence that emerged at his hearing shocked me as much as anyone. Amara offered no response. Let the silence accumulate. But I'm also a pragmatist. The 4th District has a reputation to restore, public confidence to rebuild. That requires leadership with fresh perspective and untainted credibility. His smile widened slightly. "Leadership like yours. I appreciate your confidence." "What I'm proposing," he leaned forward, lowering his voice as though sharing a confidence, "is that such leadership might benefit from guidance, institutional knowledge, the kind of understanding that develops only through years of experience navigating these particular waters." There it was, the offer, dressed in flattery and presented as mentorship. But the underlying message was unmistakable. Join me or face me. There was no third option. What kind of guidance specifically? Nothing formal, simply consultation. When difficult decisions present themselves, personnel matters, case assignments, budget allocations, a brief conversation beforehand can prevent misunderstandings, smooth the path forward, ensure that well-intentioned actions don't create unintended complications. Complications like what happened with Judge Reddick? The words escaped before she could reconsider. Hawthorne's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes, a rapid recalculation. Simone Reddick resigned for personal reasons. I'm not certain what you might have heard. I haven't heard anything. I've read the disciplinary file, which was sealed as part of her separation agreement, which was archived pursuant to standard retention policies. Archived materials are accessible to administrative judges. Amara held his gaze. Judges like myself. The silence between them stretched taut. Hawthorne's smile remained fixed, but it had hardened somehow, transformed from invitation to warning. Chief Judge Nwosu, his voice dropped further. The 4th District is a complicated institution. Many interests intersect here, many relationships, many arrangements that have developed over considerable time. A new leader who disrupts those arrangements too aggressively might discover that the institution resists change more forcefully than anticipated. Is that a threat, Judge Hawthorne? It's perspective from someone who has successfully navigated these particular waters for many years. He rose, dropping several large bills on the table. Enjoy the remainder of your meal, and please give careful thought to what I've said. He departed without looking back. Amara remained at the table, untouched food before her, and wrote beneath the tablecloth where no server could observe. Hawthorne meeting. Offered guidance. Mentioned Reddick when challenged. Implicit threat delivered. Recording captured entire exchange. She had activated the recording application on her phone before entering the building. Florida requires 2-party consent for private conversations, but they had been seated in a public dining room with servers and other members circulating nearby. The public space exception should apply. She hoped. The audio quality proved sufficient for federal purposes. Amara played the recording for Cole and Chen that evening in her locked chambers, with a white noise generator running near the door. He's careful. Cole frowned at the playback. Nothing explicitly incriminating, but the Reddick reference is significant. Significant how? He didn't deny involvement. He acknowledged the file existed and noted it was sealed. That's closer to confirmation than denial. Cole looked at Vale. Vale looked at the original complaint Hawthorne filed against Reddick. Can we obtain it? It's sealed under the terms of her separation agreement. We would need a court order or her direct cooperation to access it, or we could simply ask her. Amara's voice was quiet but firm. She's practicing in Tampa now. Small civil rights firm. If she's willing to discuss what actually happened, if she's willing to provide an affidavit, that's a significant if. Cole shook her head. People who've been forced out of institutions usually want to stay out. Reopening old wounds for an investigation that might not produce results. I'll ask her myself. One attorney to another. She has every right to decline. Vale and Cole exchanged weighted glances. Do it, Cole said finally, but carefully. If Hawthorne learns you're contacting Reddick, he'll understand exactly how serious this investigation has become. He already understands. I mentioned her name at lunch and watched his reaction. Then we're operating against a ticking clock. He'll be taking protective measures, destroying evidence, coordinating stories, all the things Vance's people attempted, but executed with considerably more sophistication. Then I need to reach Reddick before his protective measures include her. The drive to Tampa consumed hours. Amara departed West Palm Beach at dawn, before the courthouse opened, before anyone could note the chief judge's vehicle heading north on the interstate. She told her clerk she had personal business requiring attention. Technically accurate. Simone Reddick's practice occupied a converted bungalow near the university campus. The kind of modest space that signaled commitment to mission over profit. A hand-lettered sign beside the door read, Reddick Civil Rights Law. Beneath it, in smaller script, Justice Doesn't Wait. The woman who answered Amara's knock appeared smaller than memory suggested. 5 years had added silver threads to her hair and new lines around her eyes, but the sharp intelligence remained, the assessing gaze of someone who had survived fire and emerged transformed. Chief Judge Nwosu. Reddick's tone was careful, measured. I wondered when someone would come asking questions. You were expecting this? After Vance's suspension, I assumed it was only a matter of time before someone started examining the broader picture. She stepped aside, opening the door wider. Please, come inside. This isn't a conversation for the porch. The office interior was cramped but meticulously organized. Case files in labeled stacks, legal texts lining every available wall, a desk buried under documents that suggested active caseload and genuine purpose. Reddick gestured toward a worn leather chair and settled into her own seat behind the desk. Before you ask any questions, let me save us both time. Reddick's voice flattened, became almost mechanical. Everything contained in that sealed file is accurate. Hawthorne filed the complaint. He coordinated supporting statements from 3 other judges. The allegations were entirely fabricated. The evidence was manufactured. When I attempted to contest the proceedings, my attorney informed me that fighting would guarantee I never practice law in Florida again. Resignation with sealed records was presented as the only viable alternative. The words emerged with the cadence of something rehearsed countless times, repeated in the dark, spoken to no one who could help. I'm sorry, don't be sorry. Be effective. Reddick's eyes hardened. I've waited several years for someone with the standing and the evidence and the willingness to actually challenge Hawthorne. I watched your case from a distance, watched Vance's hearing. When I learned you'd been appointed chief judge, I thought perhaps finally. I need your help to make perhaps into certainty. I assumed as much. Reddick opened a desk drawer and withdrew a thick folder. That's why I've kept copies of everything. The original complaint, the supporting statements, emails between Hawthorne and the other judges involved, the draft separation agreement with its mandatory confidentiality provisions. She slid the folder across the desk. Amara opened it with hands that remained steady through pure force of will. The contents were devastating. Email from Hawthorne to Vance, Reddick ruled against the union again. Time to discuss appropriate response. Response from Vance to Hawthorne. Understood. Standard procedures, reply from Hawthorne to Vance. Standard procedures. I'll initiate. You support. Others will follow. Standard procedures. As though destroying a colleague's career was merely another administrative task, another item on the daily agenda. Why did you keep these? Because I knew they would matter eventually. Because I spent many years building a career that they demolished with manufactured paperwork and coordinated whispers and a sealed file that made it appear I was the problem rather than the victim. Reddick's voice cracked slightly. Because I lie awake most nights remembering what they did and having no means to make anyone believe it actually happened. Now you have the means. Now I have you. Reddick nodded slowly. I'll sign whatever affidavit your investigation requires. I'll testify in any proceeding where my testimony is relevant. I'll stand in open court and describe in precise detail what Sterling Hawthorne did to end my judicial career. And I'll do it looking directly into his eyes. Amara gathered the folder, feeling its weight like physical evidence of years of institutional betrayal. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Reddick rose and walked her to the door. Hawthorne has survived this long because he's intelligent and connected and patient. He will see this coming. He will have contingency plans. I understand the risks. Do you? Reddick paused with her hand on the doorknob. The night before I signed the resignation agreement, someone entered my vehicle while it was parked in my own driveway. Nothing was taken, nothing was damaged, just a message. The following week, my daughter's school principal called to inform me that a man had been asking questions about her daily schedule. Her voice dropped. I signed the agreement the next morning. The words settled between them like something with physical mass. I'm not telling you this to frighten you. I'm telling you so you comprehend what you're confronting. Hawthorne doesn't limit his operations to courtrooms. He operates everywhere. And when he determines that you represent a genuine threat rather than a manageable inconvenience, he will abandon subtlety entirely. Amara considered the stairwell, Pike's hand around her arm, the impact of his palm against her face, the missing security footage. I stopped being frightened years ago. Reddick smiled for the first time since Amara had arrived. It was a small expression, sad around the edges, holding more warning than warmth. That's precisely what I told myself right before they demonstrated how wrong I was. What Hawthorne did to Reddick was just the beginning. But Amara isn't Reddick, and this time the evidence won't disappear. The return drive to West Palm Beach felt longer than hours. Amara's thoughts churned through possibilities and contingencies, the strategic calculations of an adversary who had been refining his methods for over a decade. Hawthorne would learn about the Tampa visit, if not today, then soon. He maintained sources throughout the system, eyes and ears in places she probably hadn't identified yet. But she had Reddick's folder now, the smoking gun that proved coordination at the highest levels, documentation that couldn't be sealed or archived or made to disappear. She pulled into her apartment complex parking structure shortly after that moment that evening, exhausted but alert. The folder pressed against her chest like armor. She didn't notice the vehicle until its headlights flashed. Black sedan, tinted windows parked in the visitor space directly opposite her assigned spot. The lights flashed twice more, a signal or a warning. Her hand found her phone, thumb hovering over the emergency icon. The driver's door opened. A figure emerged, moving from shadow into the pale illumination of the overhead fluorescence. Russell Pike, released on bail, awaiting trial, standing 15 feet from her vehicle at night. Evening, Chief Judge. Amara didn't exit her car, didn't unlock the doors. kept her thumb positioned over that emergency icon. "There's no reason for concern." Pike raised both hands, showing empty palms. "I'm not here to cause problems, just to talk. We have nothing to discuss." "That's where you're mistaken." He took a step closer. Now she could see his face clearly. The same features that had loomed over her in the stairwell, twisted with contempt. But something was different now, something almost desperate around the edges. "I'm going to prison, we both understand that. Evidence tampering, assault on an officer of the court. They're pursuing every available charge." His laugh was hollow, bitter. "But here's the relevant detail. I didn't act alone. Never did. Everything I performed in that courthouse, the intimidation, the convenient accidents, the footage that mysteriously vanished, all of it was sanctioned, ordered by people operating far above my level. Then, provide that information to the prosecutors handling your case. And tell them what exactly? That I followed instructions from a judge? From multiple judges?" He laughed again. "Who do you imagine will believe a bailiff's word against the people who control the entire system? I believed evidence when no one else would." "Perhaps they will as well." Pike was silent for several seconds. Something moved across his expression, not quite regret, something adjacent to it. "I struck you in that stairwell." He stopped, started again. "I was frightened. Vance claimed you represented a threat to everything. Said you needed to be managed. Said if I didn't handle the situation, someone else would handle it more permanently. I believed him because he was a judge, and you were merely what? Merely someone who didn't understand her proper position." The words emerged laden with self-awareness. That's how they described it. Understanding your position, maintaining order, following established protocols. I performed everything they demanded, and now I'm the one facing consequences while they arrange their escapes. Then don't permit them to escape. Simple advice from someone wearing judicial robes and carrying federal protection. I possess nothing except the knowledge of what I did and who instructed me to do it. Amara studied him through the windshield, the man who had assaulted her, who had threatened her, who had spent years making her professional life a particular variety of hell, and now stood in a parking structure at night, appearing less like an enemy than a casualty of the same war. The Department of Justice is conducting an investigation. If you possess genuine information, names, dates, documentation, they might have interest in arrangements. What variety of arrangements? Cooperation exchanged for consideration. It occurs frequently. Pike laughed once more, but this time the sound contained something resembling relief. "You're offering me terms after everything I did to you. I'm describing an available option. What you choose to do with it remains entirely your decision." He stood motionless for an extended moment, shadows shifting across his features as vehicles passed on the nearby highway. Then he reached into his jacket. Amara tensed, her thumb pressed harder against the phone screen. He withdrew an envelope, held it toward her car. "Everything I possess, names, dates, emails I should have destroyed but didn't. Every instance Vance delivered. Every instance Hawthorne chose to look elsewhere." He extended his arm further. "I'm not providing this because I feel remorse, although I do. I'm providing this because I'm exhausted. Exhausted from serving as the weapon other people aim and fire." Amara lowered her window just enough to accept the envelope. It was thick, heavy with the accumulated weight of years of documented complicity. Why now? Why not months ago when the investigation commenced? His response was barely audible above the distant traffic. "Because I believe they would protect me the way they always protected anyone who followed instructions and maintained silence." He moved toward his vehicle. Turns out loyalty only flows in one direction in their world. He drove away. Amara sat alone in the parking structure, envelope in her grip, until his taillights vanished around the corner. Then she entered her apartment, secured every lock, and opened the envelope with hands that trembled only slightly. 43 pages, emails, scheduling records, incident reports, a comprehensive timeline of every management task Pike had been directed to perform across several years of service. And on the final page, a name she hadn't anticipated, District Attorney Bennett Rowe, the official who would have prosecuted any civil rights case emerging from the 4th District, the official who had declined to file charges in every excessive force complaint lodged against Palm Beach County law enforcement for the past decade, the official who was, according to Pike's documentation, copied on every email Hawthorne transmitted regarding problematic attorneys and judges. The conspiracy extended beyond the courthouse. It had captured the prosecution as well. She wrote in her notebook by the dim light of her kitchen, Pike, envelope, 43 pages, Rowe implicated, coordination confirmed across branches. No sleep tonight. She was correct about the sleep. The meeting with Cole occurred at the following morning in a federal facility far from West Palm Beach. Conference rooms swept for surveillance devices, doors secured. You're certain about this? Cole spread the documents across the table. Reddick's folder, Pike's envelope, the timeline Amara had constructed through the night. You're certain about all of it? I'm certain the documents are authentic. I'm certain the pattern exists. What I'm uncertain about is whether it constitutes sufficient grounds. It's sufficient to expand the investigation substantially. Cole glanced at Chen. We'll need to involve the public integrity section. If Moore is implicated, this becomes prosecutorial misconduct as well as judicial. That's an entirely different category of case. Different how? Additional resources, heightened scrutiny, significantly greater political sensitivity? Cole leaned back. A sitting district attorney accused of coordinating with corrupt judges to suppress civil rights cases? That generates national attention, congressional interest. The variety of matter that creates careers and destroys them in equal measure. Whose career specifically? Everyone's. Mine. Chen's. Cole held her gaze. Yours. You comprehend what you're initiating? Once this becomes public, there's no quiet resolution. No sealed records and confidential settlements. This becomes open warfare. Amara considered Reddick. The 17 attorneys? 3 years of sanctions and threats, and the gradual understanding that the system wasn't malfunctioning. It was performing precisely as designed. I've been engaged in warfare for years. I simply didn't recognize who I was actually fighting. Now you recognize. Now I recognize. Cole nodded slowly. Then she collected the documents and rose from her chair. Authorization from Washington should arrive within the week. Meanwhile, document everything. Trust no one within the system. And Chief Judge? Yes. Identify somewhere secure to stay. Not your apartment, not your office. Somewhere Hawthorne hasn't cataloged. You believe he would? I believe a man who has invested many years constructing a criminal enterprise inside a court system will take whatever measures necessary to protect that enterprise. Cole opened the door, including measures you haven't yet imagined. Amara located somewhere secure. A hotel in Boca Raton registered under her mother's maiden name, paid in cash. She informed no one, not Vale, not Alvarez, not even the federal agents. Simply vanished from her apartment and materialized at her office each morning as though nothing had changed. Everything had changed. The authorization from Washington arrived on pattern or practice investigation, expanded scope, full subpoena authority. Hawthorne, Rowe, and 4 additional judges designated as subjects. Coordinated prosecution of civil rights violations under color of law. Amara learned about the subpoenas the same way the public did, through news coverage. Breaking. DOJ opens comprehensive investigation into Florida 4th District Court System. Multiple judges, county prosecutor, named as subjects. Chief Judge Nwosu commended for cooperation. Her phone registered 47 incoming calls within the first hour. She answered none. Hawthorne's call arrived at noon, not to her mobile, to her office line, the number she couldn't ignore. Chief Judge. His voice was frozen steel. I assume you've observed the coverage. I have. I want you to understand that I intend to contest this vigorously. Every allegation, every subpoena, every piece of documentation that somehow reached federal investigators. I will fight this, and I will prevail. Because there is no evidence of any improper conduct on my part, then you have nothing to concern yourself with. What I have, his voice descended to barely above a whisper, is 3 decades of relationships throughout this state. Judges, legislators, members of the governor's own staff, individuals who owe me favors, and individuals who fear what I might reveal if pressured. A pause. Do you comprehend what that signifies? I comprehend that you're threatening me. I'm describing reality. This investigation will collapse. The careers of those who supported it will terminate. And when the dust settles, the only party still standing will be me. Another pause. Consider very carefully which side of this you wish to occupy, Chief Judge. The line disconnected. Amara sat at her desk for several minutes, phone still in hand, the ordinary sounds of the courthouse filtering through her door. Then she opened her notebook and wrote, Hawthorne, threatened decades of relationships, warned investigation would fail, recording captured, federal evidence secured. She had initiated the recording the moment his name appeared on the caller display. The proceedings extended across the following many months, not Hawthorne's trial. That required additional months of investigation, indictment, and pre-trial proceedings. These were preliminary hearings, depositions, the methodical assembly of cases against 6 different defendants simultaneously. Pike's trial concluded first. Amara observed from the gallery, not as chief judge, as a witness. She watched him take the stand and respond to questions with the same flat effect he had displayed in that parking structure. Yes. He had assaulted attorney Nwosu. Yes. He had acted on instructions. Yes. Those instructions originated from Judge Vance. And yes. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Vance had been acting on instructions from someone positioned above him. Someone else, meaning whom specifically? Pike met the prosecutor's gaze. Judge Sterling Hawthorne, Chief Administrative Judge of the 4th District. The gallery erupted. The presiding judge hammered his gavel. Reporters reached for phones despite prohibition on recording. And somewhere in the chaos, Amara observed Hawthorne's expression. Pale, drawn. The look of a man watching his carefully constructed world crumble. Pike testified for 3 consecutive days. Every email authenticated, every instruction documented, every assignment explained in clinical detail. The jury deliberated hours. Guilty on all counts. The formal indictments followed in later. Sterling Hawthorne. Conspiracy to deprive citizens of civil rights. Obstruction of justice. Wire fraud. Honest services fraud. Numerous counts carrying potential sentences totaling a severe sentence. Bennett Rowe. Identical charges plus prosecutorial misconduct, evidence tampering, and witness intimidation. Numerous counts. 4 additional judges. Various combinations of conspiracy, obstruction, and civil rights violations. Many counts distributed across the group. Amara reviewed the indictments alone in her chambers. The document was substantial enough to constitute a small volume. Every allegation documented, every victim named, the 17 attorneys, Judge Reddick, herself. Page 47 contained a name that made her pause. Elaine Burkett, conspiracy to obstruct justice, designated cooperating witness. The clerk who had concealed her filings. The woman who had attempted to confess in this very office months earlier, only to be advised to seek legal counsel. She had cooperated. provided testimony, become part of the case against the people who had utilized her as an instrument. Amara couldn't identify exactly what she felt. Satisfaction, vindication, some complicated understanding that everyone within this system had functioned as both perpetrator and victim, each one trapped in machinery larger than any individual. She settled on documenting, indictments unsealed, Burkett cooperating, justice, partial, imperfect, but authentic. The trials consumed another year. Hawthorne contested every charge, every item of evidence, every witness's credibility. His defense team represented the finest legal talent substantial wealth could secure. Former federal prosecutors, Supreme Court clerks, legal scholars charging fees most people couldn't earn in a month. The evidence proved overwhelming regardless. Emails, recordings, testimony, the paper trail Amara had constructed across years, combined with trails others had assembled in silence, waiting for someone to finally provide a platform for truth. The verdict arrived. Guilty, guilty, guilty. On most counts. Sentencing would come later. Roe's trial produced identical results. On most counts. The remaining 4 judges accepted plea arrangements before their trials commenced, agreeing to terms that would confine them in federal facilities for many years. Amara sat in her chambers on the evening of the final verdict, surrounded by 7 volumes of notebooks, and attempted to identify what she felt, not triumph. The system had destroyed people, terminated careers, denied justice for decades. A handful of convictions couldn't repair that accumulated damage, not closure. Reddick continued practicing in Tampa, still wearing scars from what they had inflicted. The 17 attorneys remained scattered, their careers interrupted or concluded by sanctions that should never have existed. Pike remained incarcerated, serving several years for assault, his cooperation earning him nothing beyond a marginally reduced sentence. What she felt was something quieter. The recognition that she had done what she could with the instruments available. That documentation wasn't merely protection, it was power, that paper trails properly maintained could demolish empires constructed on handshakes and whispered agreements. She opened her notebook to a fresh page and wrote, "Verdicts delivered. Hawthorne, guilty. Roe, guilty. Others, plea arrangements. System, marginally cleaner. Work, continuing." Then she closed the notebook, secured it in her desk alongside the others, and departed for home, to sleep without the burden of waiting for the first time in years. Years later, 2 years. The 4th District Court of Appeal appeared different now. Not physically. Same Art Deco structure, same limestone columns, same brass fixtures reflecting morning light. But the atmosphere had transformed. The whispers carried different content. The pervasive fear had dissipated. Amara traversed hallways she had once navigated like contested territory, acknowledging clerks and attorneys who responded without the edge of suspicion or hostility that had characterized her earlier years. Young attorneys, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, argued cases in courtrooms where justice, while imperfect, was at least achievable. Marisol Alvarez numbered among them, Rosa's daughter, now completing her 2nd year as a public defender, establishing a reputation in precisely the civil rights practice she had always envisioned. Amara encountered her occasionally in these hallways, invariably carrying excessive files, wearing that same determined expression her mother had maintained through the darkest years. The DOJ consent decree remained active. Federal monitors, mandatory reporting, required training, oversight machinery that would continue operating for several more years, ensuring that what had transpired could never recur. Or at least not as readily. Amara understood that systems didn't repair themselves permanently. Hawthorne occupied a federal facility serving decades. Roe was serving a long sentence. The others were distributed across various institutions, judicial robes exchanged for inmate uniforms. But somewhere in some other courthouse, Other Vances and other Hawthorns were constructing their own networks, their own arrangements, their own versions of standard procedures. The struggle didn't conclude, it merely relocated. She sat in her chambers on the anniversary of her appointment, years later, and opened the earliest of her notebooks. The leather was cracked, the pages yellowed, the ink fading in sections, but the words remained legible. $200. Sanction number 1. Motion lost by clerk. The initial entry, the commencement of everything. She turned to the most recent page, the one she had written that morning. Years. 17 attorneys sanctioned. 1 vindicated. System. Imperfect but improved. Documentation continuing. Someone knocked. Enter. Rosa Alvarez, now chief court reporter, promoted following the restructuring that succeeded the verdicts, appeared carrying an envelope. This arrived for you, hand-delivered. No return address. Amara accepted it. Plain white envelope. Her name inscribed in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside a single sheet of paper. Thank you for refusing to let them prevail. No signature. But at the bottom, a list of names she recognized. Names from her notebooks. Names of the 17 attorneys who had suffered under Vance's administration. 16 had signed. The 17th, Terrence Booker, had appended a note. Practicing again, Tampa. Available as witness whenever needed. Amara studied the paper for an extended time. Then she folded it carefully, placed it within her notebook, and wrote beneath it, received, acknowledged, remembered. Outside her window, the sun was descending over West Palm Beach, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Another day concluding, another day of documentation completed. She closed the notebook, locked it in her desk alongside 7 others, prepared for tomorrow. The struggle continued. It always would. But now, finally, she wasn't struggling alone. 6 years later, autumn that year, Amara Nwosu stood before the mirror in the changing room of the Florida Supreme Court, adjusting the collar of her new black robe, heavier than the old one, better fabric, and on the left shoulder, a gold stripe that only one person in the entire Florida judicial system was permitted to wear: Chief Justice. She still hadn't grown accustomed to the title. Perhaps she never would. Years ago, she had been a civil rights attorney, sanctioned 17 times by a corrupt judge. 6 years ago, she had been chief judge of the 4th District, the woman who had torn down a rotting empire from within. And now she stood at the highest peak of the state's judicial system, with the authority to shape law for 23 million people. Power. The word still tasted bitter in her mouth whenever she considered it. She had witnessed what power did to people, to Vance, to Hawthorne, to Rowe and the others. She had watched it transform ordinary individuals into monsters, and monsters into something far worse. But she had also witnessed the opposite. Power in the right hands could build rather than destroy, could protect rather than oppress, could open doors rather than slam them shut. That was why she had accepted this position, not for the title, not for the authority, but for the work that remained unfinished. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Chief Justice, the ceremony begins in minutes. The voice belonged to Marisol Alvarez, 32 years old now, no longer the newly minted public defender finding her footing. She had become one of the most respected civil rights attorneys in Florida, with a winning record that made prestigious firms envious. And for the past months, she had served as Amara's senior law clerk, the highest position an attorney could achieve without becoming a judge. "Thank you, Marisol. I'll be right out." Amara looked at the mirror one final time. 51 years old, silver threads now visible at her temples, lines around her eyes. Not from age, but from sleepless nights, from years of fighting, from invisible scars the system had left behind. But her back remained straight, her eyes remained clear. And in her robe pocket, the 12th leather notebook still rested, heavy with the most recent entries. She stepped out of the room and walked toward the grand hall, where history waited to be written. The inauguration ceremony took place in the Florida Supreme Court chamber, a solemn room with vaulted ceilings, marble columns, and rows of seats filled with familiar and unfamiliar faces alike. The front row was reserved for family. Amara's mother sat there, 83 years old, hair white as snow, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. She had waited her entire life for this moment. Not for herself, but for her daughter, for the next generation, for the dream she and her husband had carried when they left Nigeria a severe sentence before. Beside her sat old friends. Sylvia Hartwell, retired but still sharp, the woman who had given Amara her first opportunity, and had also warned her about Vance, Conrad Vale, now director of the Federal Judicial Oversight Office, who had stood beside her through the darkest days. And in the third row, nearly lost in the crowd, Simone Reddick, 62 years old, still practicing in Tampa, still fighting for those without voices. Her eyes met Amara's across the crowded room, and a small smile appeared on her lips. No words necessary. They both understood. The governor read the appointment declaration. The outgoing Chief Justice, who would retire after today, presented the ceremonial robe. Amara placed her hand on the Constitution and spoke the oath, her voice echoing through the silent chamber. I, Amara Okocha, do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Florida, and will faithfully discharge the duties of the office of Chief Justice to the best of my ability. Applause erupted. Camera flashes blinked. Reporters scribbled notes. History marked itself. But Amara wasn't thinking about history in that moment. She was thinking about 17 names in her first notebook, about people who had been crushed by the system before she had the chance to change it, about Terrence Booker, who had lost several years of his career and nearly lost his life, about Julian Cross, who never practiced law again, about those with no names in any file, nameless victims of a machine designed to grind them down. She had won, but victory didn't mean the war was over. The reception following the ceremony was held at a hotel near the Supreme Court building. Amara circulated through the crowd, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, smiling appropriately, and saying the right things at the right moments. Skills learned from surviving hostile environments. But her mind was elsewhere. That morning before the ceremony, she had received an email. No visible sender address. Just a single subject line. The successor. The content was brief. Hawthorne died in prison last week, but the system he built still stands. Watch the 3rd District carefully. They learned from the 4th's mistakes. No signature, no contact information, just a warning. Amara hadn't deleted that email. She had saved it to the same folder as all the other anonymous messages over the years. From the mysterious insider who had sent her the first spreadsheet, who had leaked the emails between Hawthorne and Vance, whose identity she had never managed to confirm. Chief Justice? The voice pulled her back to the present. A young woman stood before her. 25, perhaps 26 years old. Dark brown skin, hair neatly braided, and eyes containing something familiar. Determination, controlled anger, the patience of someone who had learned to wait. I'm Serena Blake, attorney 3rd District. 3rd District. The same district mentioned in this morning's email. Pleased to meet you, Ms. Blake. I apologize for disturbing you during the reception, but she glanced around, lowering her voice. I need to speak with you privately about certain irregularities in the system. Amara studied the young face before her. She saw herself years ago, full of suspicions, full of evidence no one wanted to hear, full of truths the system wanted buried. My office, Monday, that moment. Bring everything you have. Serena Blake's eyes brightened, not with joy, but with relief. The relief of someone who had finally found someone willing to listen. Thank you, Chief Justice. She disappeared into the crowd. Amara watched her go, then reached into her robe pocket and touched the leather notebook. The work never ended. It simply moved to a new chapter. That night, after all guests had departed and the building had fallen into silence, Amara sat alone in her new office, the Chief Justice's office, larger than any workspace she had ever occupied, filled with law books and precedents, filled with the history of those who had sat in this chair before her. She opened the first notebook. The leather cover had cracked with age. The pages had yellowed, but the handwriting remained clear. $200. Sanction number 1. Motion lost by clerk. Years. 12 notebooks, thousands of pages of documentation, and a journey from victim to judge. She turned to the last page of the newest notebook, the 12th, and wrote in her careful script, Chief Justice inauguration completed. New information received re 3rd District. Contact established with Serena Blake. Pattern recognition early stage. Documentation continues. She paused, pen hovering over the paper. Through the window, the lights of Tallahassee glittered against the dark sky. Somewhere out there, another young attorney was lying awake, wondering if anyone would believe her, wondering if the system could be changed, wondering if the fight was worth the cost. Amara knew those questions, had lived with them for years, still lived with them, even now. She added one more line. The work continues. It always will. Then she closed the notebook, locked it in her desk beside the others, and began preparing for Monday. The meeting with Serena Blake lasted hours. The young attorney arrived precisely, carrying 2 boxes of documents and a flash drive containing years of data. She sat across from Amara's desk and told her story. Sanctions for procedural violations that didn't exist. Filings that disappeared from the system. A pattern of discrimination so similar to the 4th District that it couldn't be coincidence. Judge Raymond Vance, Serena said, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was revealing. He's been doing this for years. 11 black attorneys sanctioned, 2 forced out of the profession entirely, and the chief administrative judge of the 3rd District has been blocking every complaint. Serena's eyes widened. How did you know? Amara pulled a folder from her desk drawer, the folder containing prints of every anonymous email she had received over the years. She slid it across to the young attorney. Because someone has been watching, the same someone who helped me years ago. She leaned back in her chair. I never learned their identity. But they've been feeding me information about judicial misconduct across the state for over a decade. This morning's tip about the 3rd District was just the latest. Serena studied the documents, her expression shifting from surprise to something harder. Understanding. So there's a network, not just corrupt judges, but someone tracking them, documenting them. That's my conclusion, a shadow oversight system operating outside official channels. Perhaps someone who lost faith in institutional reform, perhaps someone who decided documentation was the only weapon that actually worked. Like you did. Amara smiled slightly. Like I did. Except they started before me, and they're still operating. She stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city she now served, from the highest judicial position in the state. Ms. Blake, I'm going to tell you something that isn't in any official record, something I learned the hard way. Serena remained silent, waiting. The system isn't broken. It's functioning exactly as designed, to protect those in power and crush those who threaten that power. Reforming it isn't about fixing something that's malfunctioning. It's about rebuilding it from the foundation up, and that takes time. Decades, generations. She turned back to face the young attorney. I won't be Chief Justice forever. Years, maybe 15 if my health holds. When I leave, the system will still be imperfect. There will still be corrupt judges, biased clerks, prosecutors who care more about conviction rates than justice. The question isn't whether we can eliminate those problems in our lifetime. The question is whether we can create conditions that make the next generation's fight a little easier. Serena absorbed this in silence. Then she asked the question Amara had been waiting for. What do you need from me? I need you to do what I did. Document everything. Build your case. Find allies within the system. There are always some. And when you have enough evidence, Bring it to me. I'll make sure it reaches the right people this time. And if they try to stop me the way they tried to stop you? Amara returned to her desk and opened a drawer. She pulled out a brand new leather notebook, identical to the one she had been using for years, and slid it across to Serena. Then you write it down. Every sanction, every threat, every disappeared filing. You document until your hand cramps and your eyes blur and your faith in humanity hits rock bottom. And then you keep documenting anyway, because paper doesn't lie and paper doesn't disappear, not if you're careful enough. Serena took the notebook, running her fingers over the leather cover. My grandmother used to say something similar. She said memory is a river that dries up, but words on paper are stones that last forever. Your grandmother was wise. She was a court stenographer in Alabama during the Civil Rights era. Spent a severe sentence transcribing testimony. Said she learned more about justice from watching it fail than from watching it succeed. Amara felt something shift in her chest. A recognition. A connection across generations of women who had witnessed injustice and chosen to document rather than forget. What happened to her records? Donated to the National Archives. 37 boxes of transcripts from cases the official records don't mention. Lynchings classified as accidents. Murders classified as self-defense. An entire history of injustice preserved because one woman refused to let it be erased. The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. Ms. Blake? Yes, Chief Justice? I think I understand now why our anonymous informant sent you to me. Serena frowned. What do you mean? They didn't just send a warning about the 3rd District. They sent a successor. Amara smiled. A real smile this time. Not the practiced expression she wore for official functions. Your grandmother documented injustice for a severe sentence. I've been documenting for 12, and now you're starting your own notebooks. That's not coincidence, that's continuity. Serena was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion she was struggling to control. I was ready to give up, was ready to give before I found out about you, 3 years of sanctions, 2 formal complaints dismissed. My supervising partner suggested I switch to corporate law. Said civil rights was too dangerous for someone like me. She laughed bitterly. Someone like me? He didn't have to explain what that meant. But you didn't switch. No. Because I remembered what my grandmother said when I graduated law school. She was 91 then, couldn't even hold a pen anymore. But she looked at me and said, the ones who quit are the ones they're counting on. Don't be what they're counting on. Amara nodded slowly. She was right. I know. Serena stood, gathering her boxes of documents, clutching the new notebook against her chest. And now I know something else. What's that? I know I'm not alone. She walked to the door, then paused. Chief Justice, one more question. Yes. The anonymous informant, the one who's been feeding you information for years. Do you have any theories about who they might be? Amara considered the question. Considered the emails, the timing, the specific details that only someone deep inside the system could know. Considered the voice that had guided her through the darkest times, asking nothing in return. I have one theory. Will you share it? Not yet. But if I'm right, she paused, choosing her words carefully. If I'm right, they'll reveal themselves when they're ready, and not a moment before. Serena nodded, accepting the non-answer with grace. Thank you, Chief Justice, for everything. Thank me by winning. The door closed. Amara sat alone in her office, surrounded by law books and history, and the weight of responsibility she had chosen to carry. She opened her notebook and wrote, Meeting with Blake, documents received, 3rd District investigation initiated, successor identified. Then, after a moment's hesitation, she added, Grandmother was court stenographer. Pattern continues, documentation as inheritance. The river flows on. Outside, the sun was setting over Tallahassee. Another day ending, another chapter beginning. Amara closed her notebook and locked it away with the others. Then she turned to the work waiting on her desk. Briefs to review, opinions to draft, a judicial system to reform one decision at a time. The fight continued. It always would. But the river of documentation flowed on, carrying truth from one generation to the next. A current that no amount of corruption could dam forever. And somewhere in the night, an anonymous figure sat before a glowing screen, watching, documenting, waiting. The same figure who had watched Amara years ago. The same figure who had just sent Serena Blake to continue the work. They smiled in the darkness. The succession was complete. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. If you found the content helpful, please remember to like and subscribe so you won't miss our upcoming episodes. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave a comment below. We are always here to listen.